Good evening. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm really honored. Tonight's presentation is called Older Refugees, the ongoing struggle for peace, safety and dignity, Maria's voice and experiences as an aging refugee in New South Wales. I have chosen this client to present because her story and her challenges are not uncommon among our older clients. And she was very happy for me to present her case because she understands that in a way she is speaking for others as well. This is a client that I've known for a very long time. I have enormous respect for, especially because from birth, she has experienced the worst of life and people. And she could have been forgiven for turning out bitter and mean, but instead she is kind and compassionate. And that is really difficult to do. It's difficult to go through all that and still be able to transmute all that ugliness into beauty. And I think my personal opinion is that is the highest achievement a human being could aspire to. So I hope I can do some justice to her story with this presentation. So some background information. Maria is 82 years old. She comes from El Salvador, and she is of Nahuel Pipil background, even though she is quite disenfranchised from that culture, as we'll see later. She speaks Spanish and very limited English. She's evangelical Christian, arrived in 1989 with her 5 children and her partner, who's not the father of her children. All children have different fathers, and they were all born of relationships she formed as means of survival, as we'll see later. She never went to school, very basic literacy in Spanish and very little in English. She's a historical client who's been attending our groups every week for over 30 years. And she comes to counseling when she feels she needs it. So some culture and history. El Salvador has a long history of armed conflict. And in Maria's lifetime, there's the Farmers' Uprising in 1932, the country's involvement in World War II, as well as a civil war that lasted 12 years and was followed by a period of violence and upheaval that lasts still today. The country is still suffering from the consequences of all that armed conflict. And for Maria and many other women, one of the consequences of this protracted conflict is gender imbalance among the population. So in Maria's time there were a lot of women and not enough men, because a lot of men died in the war. And that, together with the distraction of all the social structures, institutions, the corruption, and all that war brings, that meant for Maria that women who were not attached to a man were seen as fair game, and her children too. So they would be basically taken by everyone who saw them. And that's why it was so important for her to attach herself to men in seeking protection. So with assessment and interventions that we've done with Maria, the most important thing for her is the group experience, because it's where she feels the most safety and the most normal. She comes to counseling on and off many times over the years. She always self-refer. And the last referral, the one I'm still working with her with, is August 2022. She's been also referred to acupuncture at start a couple of times. Trauma history. Maria has very complex trauma history, starting before she was born, basically, because her parents were very poor, living in rural area, indigenous, never went to school, they had very little, and they lived in areas where the conflict was very strong. They were resettled so many times. And this is why she lost contact with her indigenous culture. Due to that, you know, the moving around, and also colonialist mindset that makes people discriminate against indigenous people. She has experienced extreme poverty, hunger, lack of safety, discrimination for being an unmarried mother, for being indigenous, for being poor, for not having gone to school. She has experienced rape, domestic violence, street violence, serious injuries and serious illness without any medical attention, witnessed to atrocities. And perhaps the most painful is the fact that herself and her children were mentally, physically, emotionally, and sexually abused by every single one of her partners. And this is, I think it highlights the horror of the situation, because what a position to be in, for a mother to choose for her children to be abused by one man, because the alternative is so much worse. And this really makes me pause, and I think it demands a moment of reflection, humble reflection and acknowledgement from all of us, that about the fact that so many people around the world don't get any choice. They don't get to choose what they want or what's best for them. And they're just left having to pick the least worst option out of horrible options. Maria, this is a family tree, which was created by an awesome training team, and it was very difficult for me to think of how to do it. You can see that she lives with a partner, but all these children, the result of a relationship that broke down the minute she was pregnant, or the minute she had the baby. This man left her. Obviously, this situation with the children and the partners have created so much resentment in her family, and that plays out today in her old age, when her health is declining and she's needing support from her family. But this trauma just infiltrates the relationship and sabotages the relationship, and perhaps the potential help that the children could give to Maria. Maria presents with very similar symptoms every time she self-refers, mostly because she never completes treatment. She comes to a few sessions and then she leaves. And the reason for this is shame. There is a stigma attached to coming to counseling. And so even though she needs it and she seeks it, she finds it helpful, she also feels that shame and she wants to leave. She leaves the minute she feels better, a little bit better. So it's always anxiety, sleep issues, feeling trapped, feelings of guilt over the past, and bouts of depression following family conflict, which is often. And it also strongly influenced by guilt, those conflicts, and those bouts of depression. Feeling powerless, lack of confidence in herself, fears for the future, especially around being older, her health being increasingly worse, and she's noticing she needs more and more support that she's not going to get from her children and also from the community, because the discrimination that she experienced in her country of origin is maintained here by the Latin American community. She is considered a lost woman, and also she's very low status in the community, so they don't help her, and they continue to perpetuate the feelings of disadvantage and the lack of opportunities. A lot of doors are closed to her simply because the choices that she had to make in the past to survive, for her children to survive as well, which is profoundly unfair, and yet is part of her everyday life. We got this slide here from Aroche and Coelho that gives us a little bit of an idea of all the factors that come together to create the client's presentation. So just quickly, protective factors for Maria are her faith, her family, the love for her family, and her natural optimism. International events, El Salvador remains a very dangerous, volatile place, and her family is quite poor and disadvantaged over there, so she's constantly reminded of what she went through and feeling powerless, I guess, because she cannot do much for her people over there. Her trauma reactions, which can be quite strong when she is triggered and when she doesn't feel well. The problems with her community here and how they treat her, as well as the fact that she's getting old. She's losing her independence. She's losing her strength. And I think that triggers her a lot, because throughout life, the one person she's been able to rely on is herself. And she is weaker now. Some of her strength, Maria she has a wonderful sense of humor, an ability to see the good in life and in situations as well as in others. As I said before, she's compassionate and she's caring. She forgives quickly. Maria sees herself in others and sees others in herself. And that's the true meaning of compassion. And I think that's where her grace comes from, that place of oneness that allows her to forgive herself and others so easily. She's able to separate others' negative attitudes and behaviors towards herself from their worth as individuals. She's resourceful, she has a true survivor spirit, she's high energy, and she's very creative in how she approaches challenges. She seeks help from start when she feels that she needs it. She's very proactive in finding help for herself. She's socially adaptable and adept, and she has a very likable personality. Working therapeutically with Maria as an older refugee woman, the invisible factors that affect outcomes. So when she comes to counseling, things like psychoeducation, for example, talking about trauma, its effects in body, relationships, all that, she has a blockage because she never went to school and she grew up believing that she's not intelligent, that she cannot learn. But when she means intelligence, she means school, like book smart, So when we present her with materials that seem schoolish to her, she doesn't listen, she blocks it. With the counseling structure, exercises, goals, she also has a lot of trouble keeping up with all that structure. She's very organic, and it's part of her culture as well, in the way she approaches things. So, and underpinning all that difficulties with adhering to structures is the fact that there's so much shame attached to coming to counseling. Not only she's the loose woman, the one with a checkered past, the one that's open to all this gossipy talk in the community, but she also comes to counseling. So there's something wrong with her. So that's difficult for her as well. There's a lot of difficulty with practical assistance. So because she lacks support in family and community, we know that it's very important that she has services in place helping her. But it's very difficult for her to accept this help because these services, government institutions in her country were not only unhelpful and corrupt, but also very dangerous at times. So there's a lot of work to be done for her to even be comfortable with services. And then there's the problem of engaging the family and community and all the trauma and the resentment of her children and all the discrimination and judgment from the Latin American community in Sydney. Some of the strategies that I've used in counseling to help her overcome, for us to move on from these challenges. So for the learning blockage, I use storytelling, metaphors, similes. And so, for example, if we're talking about the fight, flight, freeze response, we will say something like, and I'll do some drawings as well. We'll talk of, on the top of a hill, that's your head, there's a castle, that's your brain. Inside of a castle lives a very old man who doesn't speak English, he doesn't speak Spanish, and his job is to release the troops into the town where the town is under threat. That old man is the amygdala. And then we can introduce, for example, how do we communicate to this man that the threat has passed and we need him to call the troops back into the castle? That's cortisol. We speak in his language, and his language is breathing. So then we'll introduce the breathing exercise, and Maria will see, I am communicating with this man in the castle for this purpose. Because she's so colorful and so funny and so emotional in the way she participates, she puts a lot of, she makes it very memorable. She remembers all these concepts because she's attached some emotion to them. When it comes to shame, accessing counseling, we change the name of the intervention. So she doesn't come to counseling, she comes to classes where we talk about techniques for living healthier, for resolving conflict, for you're managing better. And that helps her a little bit. Also, when it comes to lack of trust around organizations and other services, we do a lot of liaison and advocacy, as well as extending the trust that she has in us to those other services. But it does require a lot of casework, especially in the implementation stage, because she's highly triggered when, even if we prepare her so much, she's highly triggered when services come to her house. So she requires so much follow-up. And when it comes to family and community engagement, we're working on accepting the fact that, you know, she cannot change what happens, and it is likely that they're never going to respond to her like she hopes. So we're looking at other solutions and trying to find alternatives to what she believes should happen, which is, in her culture, we are looked after by our children in our old age, and that's not happening for her, which causes her a lot of grief as well. Supporting Maria at community and group level. So group interventions are so important for her. She said to me before, STARTS groups are the only social setting in which I feel normal, respected, and not judged. So if we think about trauma and healing from trauma, the one thing that needs to happen first is that the traumatizing events need to have stopped before we start healing. And in her case, they haven't stopped because the discrimination, the shame, the stigma came with her to Sydney. And so if we think about it, these groups are much more than just a social thing for her. These are a healing pod. It's the platform in which she can feel safe, secure for a little while and start healing. So her groups is where she's done a lot of her healing. If we introduce student support at group level with case management, which has allowed us to help these clients in a much more intensive way that our roles as counselors would allow us, just time and other constraints. So that's been super helpful as well. It's allowed Maria to have someone supporting her all the way from introducing the concept of a service to implementation and troubleshooting and beyond. We always promoting engagement with essential services at group level, because we understand it's a way of preventing risk in all the clients. And we know that our clients, just by the experiences that they had, the symptoms and the symptomatology in the entire family, they're at higher risk of you know, some of these problems, elderly abuse, falls, malnutrition, so many things. Also, we partner with other services to work together and help them understand that the older refugee issues and that what's called the difficult client problem is a little bit of what Timo was talking about. Clients are so triggered that they can be difficult to people who don't understand why they're acting the way they're acting. Outcomes so far, so increased level of support and implementation of services with follow-up. Client report a decrease in frequency and intensity of chronic headaches. This is super important because these awful headaches that send her to hospital are the marker for her, the way she realizes, oops, I need help. So her headaches have declined, minimized. Better management of family conflicts. She's implementing some strategies and she's getting some results. Self-care strategies, and especially, I guess, the guilt that she experiences when she implements self-care strategies. It's like, how can I be better when my choices have traumatized my children to this degree? So we're working on that. The client reports feeling more in control and decreased levels of anxiety. And also, I wanted to just take a minute for us to really acknowledge the importance of these specially designed trauma-informed, trauma-safe social spaces for these clients of ours who, like Maria, have very little safety outside these spaces, and the importance of these platforms to even begin to think of healing. I've run out of time. I could talk for ages, but thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to your questions if you have any. Thank you.